Hey, welcome into the Stinkin Truth Podcast. Mark Schlereth here, and I've got a new co-host for today because he's filling in for my partner, Mike Evans. It's Richie Carnie back at the station. Richie, man, great to have you on the program. Thanks for filling in for Mike. You know, the crazy thing, Richie, is like he has a doctor's appointment today. And this is like, I just found it odd that this is the third time he's going to go get his prostate checked this year. So I don't know that that's normal.
Yeah.
Like that, it almost feels like that's something he likes to do, but safety first. I always say safety first. That's important.
Yeah, listen, I definitely am a better safe than sorry kind of guy.
Right.
But I will say, you know, the old adage, if you shake it more than twice, you're playing with it. If you check your prostate 3 times, you're playing with it.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just like, Doc, are you sure there's nothing wrong? Right. I just need one more. I just need one more time just to be sure. Yeah, it does not sound good. How are you, friend, man? It's great to see you. I haven't seen you in a while since I moved to New York. I miss you, but it's great to see you, bud.
Yeah, I miss you too. We always had some good chats in the morning, and I would much rather be walking through Central Park with the weirdos when it's 80 degrees outside than, you know, the slushy, snowy tundra that we've got here right now.
Yeah, the weather here in New York has been absolutely gorgeous. I'll be on another walk today because it's in the 70s today, mid 70s here in New York in the city. So it's just been great. Well, anyhow, it's good to have you on. It's good to be with you, man. What do you got?
Well, listen, the trade deadline is come and gone. I feel like it wasn't the most spicy deadline that we've seen in recent years. There was a handful of moves, and some teams certainly shored up areas that they needed to, but there wasn't a lot of splashy moves, maybe outside of like a DeAndre Hopkins.
Sure.
The first game that I have circled on my calendar this weekend, as I'm going to go through, is Steelers Commanders. I think that's going to be a fascinating matchup because on one hand, the Steelers are sitting there at 6-2. They changed quarterbacks halfway through the season here, and they just seem to find a way to make it work. I don't know how. I don't know that they fully know how. It's a testament to Mike Tomlin and the culture that he's built and the way he's able to run that. How do you see the Steelers stacking up against a team like the Commanders, who are kind of taking the NFC by storm?
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because the Commanders, obviously with Jayden Daniels and what he's been able to accomplish on the offensive side, the Cliff Kingsbury connection. And I think one of the big things about Cliff Kingsbury, and it's funny because I've sat down with him several times because I've done several Washington games, him just being, you know, humbled and him being like, hey, listen, man, I had to really look at my system and, you know, that air raid system that I ran in college and look how it didn't necessarily fit in the National Football League. So, like, you've got to have a certain amount of humility to kind of really critically look at yourself and then delve into what went wrong and then say, hey, man, I need somebody who's got a better understanding of the run game. So move yourself into that realm. Go out and hire Anthony Lynn, who was a former head coach with the Chargers, former head coach with the Bills, and say, man, we got to figure out how to run the football. And then to be able to kind of meld those two systems together and to be able to figure that out and to be able to have this dominant run game using Jayden Daniels, using the running backs with Robinson and Eckler and all those guys, and still having some incredible other players on the outside. Terry McLaurin is a great player, but I love that aspect of what Washington has done, and I love that aspect of what Cliff Kingsbury has done because it certainly fits. And you talk about Jayden Daniels. I mean, you're talking about a kid that, you know, is the first guy in the building every morning, the last guy to leave. He spends several hours a day, and I've been on a virtual, like he gets on this virtual, like runs plays. So Cliff Kingsbury, this is really cool. So Cliff Kingsbury, have you heard any about the virtual reality football stuff that he does?
I haven't heard about it with him. The last time I remember this was actually here locally when Drew Lock hurt his finger and wasn't able to do stuff, but they were having him do virtual. Yeah. It's like you put on a VR headset and it mimics like being at the line of scrimmage.
So he has the VR headset. And so I tried his headset on and Washington let me do this. And so he's got the VR headset. And then Cliff Kingsbury actually records that week the game plan. Mm-hmm. So all the formations. So, you know, he'll be in there like, hey, man, here's what we're going to run. Right. And he'll be like, OK, let's run trip strike nasty, H left outside, 2 jet branch buffalo, can it with 18 handoff strong. on two, ready, break. And so then you walk up to the line of scrimmage, and I'm telling you, you walk up to the line of scrimmage, you're in the stadium. So whichever stadium you're playing in, you're in the stadium. Like you could look up, I was in, Washington Stadium, and you look up on there and you see the names that are up there, right? The guys that are in the Hall of Fame and everything else, right? So you see all the names, and then all of a sudden there's a defense there, right? And you get to check the defense, like what's their front? You're like, they're in an over front, they're in an under front, whatever. Mm-hmm. And then you see if they're in press man or whatever. And then you snap the ball and you go back and and it speeds it up, and it allows you to kind of play the game or see the game before you actually go out and play it. It's pretty, like, I'm not saying that it's 100% realistic, but it's just from the feel, the call of the play, the hearing the play call, being able to repeat the play call, and then seeing how it all pans out. And this kid goes home with that, and he spends hours every day on the virtual reality aspect of it, and on top of the studying and being the first guy in. And I called the game in Arizona, and so I go to meet with Cliff Kingsbury at 7:30 in the morning at their hotel. And I'm like, hey, what's going on? And he goes, oh, dude, Jayden was in my office this morning. He knocked on the door at 5 a.m. What are you doing? It's like, well, I'm, putting some stuff together for practice today. He's like, oh, what are you working on? Like, I mean, just is like this insatiable appetite for understanding. Now, on the flip side of it, one more thing, you talked about trade deadline. This is interesting because both of these teams have made trades. Washington went out and got Marshawn Lattimore, who's a big-time corner when he's healthy, and he's had some injury issues here the last couple of years, as he's gotten a little bit older. But he's a big-time matchup man-to-man cornerback, which gives Dan Quinn some freedom to do some things on defense that they haven't been able to do to this point. So it makes them a much better defense. And I really think that they went out and got that, made that trade, so they could compete with Philadelphia. Because they're looking at winning this division. Because nobody comes out and says, "Hey, we want to go. 15-2 on the season and be the number one seed." Your first goal is let's win our division. So they're sitting at 7-2 right now, half a game ahead of Philly or whatever. Go, how are we going to match up with that offense that's got A.J. Brown? How are we going to match up with that offense that's got Smith and Saquon Barkley and all that? Well, we've got to be able, especially in the red zone, to eliminate scores, make them kick field goals. So one is, do we have a matchup guy at the cornerback position can lock up with A.J. Brown so we can kick coverage to the opposite side of the field and get double teams everywhere else? So that gives you that opportunity. So that's one, trade that I look at and goes, wow, that was a really good trade by Washington. The flip side of that, with the Steelers, I am telling you, watching Russ play the last two games that he played, like I've had to eat crow with all my Pittsburgh people because
frustrating.
He was, well, you saw it. He was just absolute horse shit here for 2 years. And you just think it's over. But I will tell you, Arthur Smith has done a great job, the offensive coordinator of Pittsburgh, of putting him in a position to be successful. I did all the passing charts the last 2 weeks. Nothing, Richie, there is nothing in the middle of the field. So all the things that he doesn't do well in the middle of the field, they don't even tempt it. Everything in the quick passing game, whether it's a quick 5 or a quick 3, is all outside the numbers. So it's da-da-da-da-da. And one thing that happens, especially in three-step drops, is the center guard attack the line of scrimmage, right? So they come up and get on the line of scrimmage, and then the tackle's set. So there's this natural window between the guard and the tackles that opens up, and that's where they throw the football. So there's no impediment from a vision standpoint for Russ. So he's delivering the ball quickly, and then they're using him in the boot keep game, and like you're using him in a lot of ways. And then the play pass stuff, they all just throw the go balls to George Pickens, and he's been exceptional. I mean, just exceptional. And it'll be interesting to see if it continues. And I mean, like I've eaten crow, but I'll give him a ton of credit. I'm going to give Russ all the credit in the world for understanding that, hey, what you've done or what you've tried to do the last several years in Seattle and in Denver, you're not capable of doing it. And so, like, it takes. I just talked about Cliff Kingsbury having some humility and really critically looking at himself and what didn't work. I have to give Russ a ton of credit for having the humility to go, you know what? I'm not a drop back middle of the football field, throw the dig. That's not what I do.
Yeah, and we found out in hindsight a lot of the things that Pete Carroll and his staff did to mask some of those deficiencies from Russ and made him look like the moon ball throwing Jesse that, went to 2 Super Bowls and won one. And, it's hard to look at it from us here in Denver watching it happen. I think it's hard, but I think you also have to add the added context that Sean Payton was the head coach here. It's his offensive system, and him and Russ schematically, let alone personality wise, we're just oil and water. So what Russ is doing in Pittsburgh wasn't going to happen here unless you had a different offense besides Sean Payton's, and you weren't going to do that. And I will say, you brought it up. I think Russ deserves a lot of credit for humbling himself. And you almost kind of wonder if maybe he wouldn't have been, it still may not have worked out in the long run, but could we have gotten more out of Russ's tenure here? It almost feels like the Broncos were the girl that the guy dated before he found the one he was going to marry, right? Like you had to go through the ugly, tough kind of like didn't work, even though it looked good on paper. Mm-hmm. And then you find the one that you settle down with. And I want to.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna mention. I think it's a great analogy, and I think Russ has done that phenomenal job, and I think the Steelers have done a great job. And they went out at the trade deadline, went out and got Mike Williams, who wasn't really doing anything with the Jets coming off that ACL. He could be a big play threat down the field as well. And Preston Smith, a rotational guy as a defensive end edge guy. Like the Steelers are sneaky right now. Like they're sneaky good, leading that division at 6-2. And Mike Tomlin, you mentioned Mike Tomlin. You talk about that dude is all balls.
Yep.
Like he is all balls because you're sitting at 4-2, and Justin Fields is playing the best football he's ever played at 4-2, and he goes, "No, you know what? I'm going with Russ." And I was like, "Oh, what a mistake this is going to be!" And it's incredible.
It's a testament to him because you look at. You have to have such a well-established bedrock foundational belief in yourself and your principles and what you have, and have that permeate to such a degree through your locker room, through your organization, and on upward, to be a guy like Mike Tomlin who says, hey, Arthur Smith, who was infamous in Atlanta for committing crimes against football on the offensive side of the ball and not knowing how to make Drake London and Kyle Pitts and all these weapons work. And Mike Tomlin says, no, that's okay. Come here. I got it. And then do the same thing with Russell Wilson, who was on a Hall of Fame trajectory before he breaks up with Seattle, has 2 brutal years in Denver. And Mike Tomlin's like, no, come here. We'll be fine. We'll make it work. And then the same thing with Justin Fields. And he's managed to do it all. So really, culturally, foundationally, it's a testament to him. And on that same note, we mentioned Jayden Daniels. Rookie quarterbacks in the NFL are under more pressure than I think they've ever been in NFL history nowadays, with the speed with which they have to microwave the transition from college to the NFL and the tightness of the rope and the leash that they're on. I mean, you look at a lot of quarterbacks under the age of 26 that have been benched, that were drafted high in the first round, and it's leading to allegations of the NFL has a development problem at the quarterback position and all of that. Jayden Daniels was drafted not first overall like Caleb into an organization that had never had a 4,000-yard passer, has never really had a true. That's enough pressure. Drake May is trying to be the latest person to replace the greatest quarterback of all time in Tom Brady because Mac Jones couldn't do it. Bo Nix is trying to be the 15th iteration of a franchise quarterback since Peyton Manning walked out the door. But Jayden Daniels was drafted to do all those things in one of the worst run, toxic organizations in the NFL, an organization that very well, both as a player and as someone who spent a lot of time covering the NFC, calling games and things like that. And in a 9-week sample size here, he has managed to not only give life and energy back into that program, but it's permeated throughout the league to where players like Marshawn Lattimore and others are calling their agents saying, I want to go play in Washington. And he's done it in less than 2 months. And I just can't, if we're giving credit to Russ for humbling himself and all that, which I'm on board with, I want to make sure that I at least can acknowledge that what Jayden Daniels, the weight that he's bearing on his shoulders and how he's handling all those outside factors that have nothing to do with football is astounding to me.
It truly is. And he is, I mean, he is one of those kids that when you sit down with him, man, humble and fun and, and just enjoying the ride, but really understands, the something I always say is just because you play a pro sport doesn't make you a professional. Yeah. There's a lot of guys who play pro sports that aren't professionals. He's a professional football player. And I'll give a lot of credit to Dan Quinn, because Dan Quinn came into an organization that has been trying desperately to create a culture and then desperately trying to change the culture from the culture that permeated the organization under Dan Snyder. And, the smell of that permeation was absolute, shit, because that guy is a terrible human. And so anyhow, that's kind of what was going on. And so, like, Dan Quinn has come into that organization and like he'd be the first to tell you, and he's told me early in the season, hey, we're not talent-wise, we're not where we need to be. But you know what? There's some things that are non-negotiables for me. We are going to play hard. We are going to play smart. And you look at them right now, like on the defensive side of the ball, they were a big play waiting to happen the last several years. They led the league in explosive plays. They're playing much cleaner football. They're making people drive the length of the football field. They're not giving up all those big time over the top touchdowns. They're 11 for 11 on fourth down conversions right now on the season. I mean, it's just, it's the testament to playing your ass off and playing disciplined football. And as long as you do that, like, good things are going to happen to you. And they've done a really good job of mix and match. And, Bobby Wagner comes over and has really kind of helped, communicate that defensive structure that he had from Dan Quinn back when he was a rookie with the Seattle Seahawks. And then Dan Quinn was a, defensive coordinator for Seattle. And then he brings in like Frankie Louvu from Carolina. And Frankie Louvu is not only a really good stand-up, middle linebacker, but he's also an edge rusher, and he's a very versatile dude. And so you can use him in a mixed match situation and create confusion for an offense. Dan Quinn has done like a coach of the year type of coaching job in an organization where it's just a mess. And I was back for alumni weekend with Washington because my teammate Darryl Green was getting his jersey retired. And dude, they've never had a deeper participation ever than they did this year. Wow. The guys, the former players, all came back in droves, were so excited to be a part of it again, that have stayed away throughout the whole entirety of the Schneider years, have just stayed away from it. Like, guys came back from the 70s and the 60s, and like they were so excited to be a part of it. So it's a really, really cool thing going on in Washington.
Couldn't agree more. And if we want to stick in the NFC, we've got another what I would consider to be a timeless classic NFL matchup: Eagles Cowboys. 6-2 Eagles, 3-5 Cowboys. The Cowboys. It feels like these two teams are kind of trending in opposite directions. I mean, sure. The Eagles are not that far off of being a holding penalty away in the Super Bowl of taking down Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. And then it felt like they kind of stumbled, and all of the shine that was on Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts started to rub off a little bit. But I think that similar to what we're seeing with Baltimore and Derrick Henry, I think the addition of Saquon Barkley, a true one of the last remaining bastions of a bell cow running back, a true 3-4 down running back in the NFL, Saquon Barkley, has completely changed the offensive identity of the Philadelphia Eagles, who by and large, their run game, I think, was bailed out a lot by the tush push. And it kind of masked how well they actually run the football. But now that they have Saquon, it feels like it's opening things up. They still have the bevy of weapons at receiver: Devonta Smith, A.J. Brown, Dallas Goedert. The list goes on. Meanwhile, the Cowboys, it just feels like are going in the complete opposite direction. And they have, primetime talent in CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott. They paid him $60 million a year to do these things. But it's not working.
Yeah, they're a mess because they're not very. They can't control line of scrimmage. They can't run the football. They chose not to invest in any free agents in the offseason. Jerry Jones wants to tell us he's all in. We're championship or bust. But they did nothing to create a championship organization. Derrick Henry was on record saying, "I'd like to play for the Cowboys." He doesn't. He's averaging over 6 yards a carry right now and is on pace for 2,000 yards rushing with the Baltimore Ravens. So you didn't do anything. And, the one free agent acquisitions they went out and got this offseason or just before the trade deadline, Jonathan Mingo, which tells me Jonathan Mingo's a second round pick. They gave up a fourth rounder for Jonathan Mingo. Really hasn't done anything, but a lot of that is probably because he plays in Carolina. But what you're saying to me right now is we're not all in for this year. We're all in. Hey, we're pushing the chips in the middle. We're getting another young player for 2025. So it just is.
And we're going to pay the same price that the Chiefs paid for DeAndre Hopkins and that Deontay Johnson went for as well.
Yeah, actually, we're going to pay more because DeAndre Hopkins went for a conditional, like a fifth conditional four. Yeah. So it just is. It's silly. It's ridiculous. And the Cowboys, now Cooper Rush is going to play, and Dak went on IR, and he's going to be on, for at least 4 weeks, but they're saying partially torn his hamstring off the bone. So it doesn't sound like he's going to be back anytime soon. But I want to focus on Philadelphia, and it's interesting because you're right about Saquon Barkley, and he's the closest thing. There's only two people ever made me get off the bench as a, big fat offensive lineman to go watch the opponent's offense play. Yeah. One was when I was young. One was Joe Montana.
Yeah.
Because it was just such effortless, just, and it's so funny because you'd be playing, and I'll never forget getting on the bus. So you get done with a game, you get on the bus to head to the airport, right? And as you're getting on the bus, there's a dude that sits in the front seat that hands out the stat sheets, here's the stats of the game. So you grab one just to kind of see how the game played out statistically. So you take it back and you sit down in your chair and you'd look and you're like, oh, I get it. You'd look down and you'd look at Joe Montana's stats and he'd be 24 of 31 for 280 yards and 4 TDs. And it was just there was never a time where it felt like, oh, they got us on a big play there. Or they got us. It was just precision, like surgeon's precision. And the other guy I got up off the bench to watch was Barry Sanders because he was just not human. And when I watch Saquon Barkley, I think he's the closest thing I've seen to Barry Sanders on a football field. He is just phenomenal. You're 100% right. Now, all of a sudden, Jalen Hurts isn't turning the ball over like he's done. The last 4 games, he doesn't have a turnover. And it's amazing how much better that is. But you go back to the game against Jacksonville last week, where it is just a pouring monsoon rainstorm, right? And Nick Sirianni essentially tries to keep Jacksonville in the game. People in Philly are so fed up with Nick Sirianni, and he's the winningest coach in Philadelphia Eagle history, and they can't stand him, right? Because you look at it like, all right, so they score to go up 16-0, and there's a penalty, and then they decide to go with a 2-point conversion, and I'm like, okay, you realize that if you don't get it, it's a 2-score game, right? If you kick the extra point, you realize it's a 3-score game, right? That is if you've got your little when to go for 2 and when to go for not to go for 2, it says right there, don't go for 2 in that situation. Kick the extra point and go up 3 scores, right? Well, he does. They don't get it, so it's 16-0. Then they're up 22-0, and it goes later on in the game, and all of a sudden it's 4th down. It's 2 minutes left or whatever it was, 2 minutes and change. It's just pouring down rain. And he decides that the best decision in that particular point in time is to kick a 57-yard field goal when it's a monsoon out. And, of course, they miss it, right? And they give the short field. But here's the deal. Listen, even if he hits that field goal at 57 yards and they kick off, you know what it is? It's a 1-score game because they were up by 5, right? So make them drive the length of the field in a 1-score game after a punt in a rainstorm with a quarterback who's been struggling. No, you know what? We're going to make it a 57-yard attempt. Oh, we didn't get it, and we give them a short field, and that game ended on an interception. But Jacksonville was driving for a game-winning touchdown. Like the mind-boggling, stupid decisions that continuously get made. I think the Philadelphia Eagles, I can make a very compelling argument. I would probably go Detroit number 1 from just a pure talent standpoint, and I think I would go Philly number 2 on the talent scale, just from top to bottom. And this game to me feels like, you know what it feels like? It feels like Alabama versus a bottom dweller in the SEC.
Yeah.
Like they have so much, that Philly has so much more talent than Dallas that this game doesn't even feel close to me. Yeah,
no, I agree with you. I think that the head scratching decisions are, I feel like we're seeing a new kind of wave of that over the last 4 or 5 years from a coaching perspective. His name's escaping me. Who was the name of the Chargers head coach who got fired?
Brandon Staley.
Yeah. He was like, he became infamous, and it started off as cute, like, oh, he's going
right.
He's doing, he's like, yeah. And then it got to a point where you're like, no, like you're just actually, this is malfeasance. Some of these things that you're doing. And I think Nick Sirianni has a little bit of that in him. And someone who I think was accused of some of that, who is proving people wrong, and you alluded to his team, is Dan Campbell. I think Dan Campbell has had a miraculous turnaround from an optics standpoint of kind of being like a newspaper cartoon coach, where he's biting kneecaps and he's drinking 40-ounce double shots, and he says all these kind of hokey, silly things, but in reality, what I think it's going into now, really since they started his first season 1-7 and then went on a run and they've kind of never looked back. He is somebody who has melded with the identity of his city. Yeah. Everything about, and I wear it. I spent 4 years in Michigan. I spent time in Detroit. That culture, that belief of like, it's up against the world, Detroit versus everybody, 8 Mile, all that's real. It's the Motor City, it's steel tough, and it's very blue collar. And Dan Campbell is like, if I close my eyes and just picture it, he's what I see. And I think that has allowed him to galvanize an organization in a locker room of a team that was kind of, even as good as Matthew Stafford was for a lot of those years, was a bottom feeder NFL team and just a really struggling franchise. And he's been able to do it similarly to the way that Mike Tomlin has done it with a castaway quarterback in Jared Goff, who one of the greatest offensive minds in the NFL, and Sean McVay was like, no, I can't make it work with this guy, even though they did go to a Super Bowl.
Right.
And they've kind of changed this entire perception, and now they are a bona fide, genuine Super Bowl contending threat in the NFC. And I find their matchup this weekend interesting, going up against the Houston Texans, because last season, CJ Stroud's rookie season, I think he kind of set a lot of NFL, pundit heads ablaze with how quickly he came out of the gates, and especially when you juxtaposed it to Bryce Young in Carolina going to there. And I think that it's interesting because I think the bar that he set was so high, CJ Stroud, that we're using it as a barometer to compare all future NFL rookies, which isn't fair.
Right.
And now in his sophomore campaign, it doesn't feel like the shine and the sizzle has been there, but yet they're sitting at 6-3 and one of the top teams in the AFC.
They should get Nico Collins back, which is going to make a big deal for them at the receiver position, because he's the one lift top of coverage guy. They've had some injuries. I tell you, the interesting thing for CJ Stroud is offensive line wise, they're one of the worst pressure teams, giving up pressures, and it's all guard, center, guard. And so how the NFL works, from a progression passing standpoint, is you get to the first read of your progression. If that's covered, you hitch up into the pocket. So it goes, if it's a 5-step drive, it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you're ready to throw. That guy's not open, up in the pocket, and that's his next throw. Well, if you're hitching in the pocket and your pocket's getting pushed back because you're getting pressure, there's no quarterback that likes pressure up the middle. Like they hate that, right? Yeah. You can step up into that pocket and avoid that outside, edge pressure as the guys come in. So that's a big issue for them. So even if you step up the pocket, you're ready to throw it to that second read in your progression, or you get to the third read in your progression, you step up again. Like, those guys are sitting in your lap. It's hard to be accurate. And that's a big issue with Houston, is he's having a little bit of a slump, if you will, but it's really because they can't protect at all. And they were, the other night, I think they gave up like 6 sacks or something. I mean, it was really bad, just bad the way they play the game against the Jets. And so, that's a big issue going on there. But I want to get back to what you said about Dan Campbell, because I've done a bunch of their games. Dan Campbell, I always say this, plays the role of meathead really well. Mm-hmm. Like, he has got that meathead kind of, you talked about biting kneecaps and all the things that he does. I'm going to tell you right now, that dude is a smart football coach. Mm-hmm. And I was in that facility back in the day, when Matt Patricia ran it and some other guys ran it. And it was like, a funeral procession walking in there. Mm-hmm. And I am telling you, it's bright. People love coming to work. That, like, not only the coaches, but the players, the staff. I mean, there's energy and it's palpable. And it all has to do with the program that Dan Campbell runs. He is amazing. He's completely authentic. And they are so freaking talented. And, you think about it, they made that trade. They send Jared Goff there. The first year they're 3-13. Second year they start off at 1-6. Jared Goff is getting booed when he's on and off the field, right? And all of a sudden, and Dan never wavered in his belief in Jared Goff. He never wavered in the belief of the team and what they were going to accomplish. And all of a sudden they took off. And now I think they're the best team in the National Football League, and they're incredibly talented. What Brad Holmes has done, their GM, what he has done, from a picking standpoint, how they built that roster, the way they have collaborated on that roster, they're outstanding, man. And I think they're the best team in the National Football League. And it's really cool to watch a guy that was a former player, a guy that I know really well, just have the success that he's had. He's been awesome, just awesome.
Yeah, and you look at it feels like a team that it really feels like this is their. I mean, they were a couple plays away from trying to make a Super Bowl run last year, and it really feels like this is a really big year for them to try to do it, because who knows what the future holds for guys like Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn and.
Nobody, and I tell you what, I don't think there's a person on the planet. Like, listen, me personally, am I rooting against the Kansas City Chiefs? You're damn right I am. Mm-hmm. I root for them to lose every game, and I do not want them to be in the Super Bowl again. But I don't even believe, even if it's NFC teams, I don't believe there's one person in America that wouldn't be a Detroit fan if Detroit gets to the Super Bowl. Other than the team that is playing them in the Super Bowl. Everybody's going to be a Detroit fan if they get there, and I hope they do. All right, listen. Before we go, I'm going to make some picks on Mike's behalf and my behalf. Now, I got to tell you what's going on right now. So every week we pick against the spread. Mike gets to pick 3 games. I pick 3 games. We alternate who picks first. So Mike picked first this week. So Mike currently going into this weekend is 14-13 on his picks against the spread. Okay.
Perfect.
Yours truly is 18-8-1 versus picks against the spread. So here we go. So Mike has taken San Francisco minus 6.5 over the Colts. Okay. I think that's what. No, it's not. What's San Francisco? Over the Bucks. Sorry, over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So 6.5 over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's taken Detroit minus 3.5 over Houston, and he's taken Pittsburgh getting 2.5 in Washington. So there's Michael's picks. Here's where I'm going. I'm going Bills minus 4 over the Colts. I'm going Falcons minus 3.5 over the Saints.
Oh yeah.
And I am going Eagles minus 7.5 over the Cowboys. I told you that Alabama versus the bottom feeder of the SEC. That's how I felt about those games. So those are our picks going into week 10. Richie, what do you think?
I like it. I think that the 49ers Buccaneers game makes me a little nervous, because
it would make me nervous too.
On paper, the Buccaneers are down their 2 best receivers, and it changes the dynamic of their offense. But they figured out Baker Mayfield has continued. He hasn't lost a step. He's just replicated that production to Bucky Irving and Cade Otton.
Yeah.
Instead of Chris Godwin and Mike Evans.
Should have gone for 2 and won that game, or tried. They should have just gone for 2. I mean, as soon as they did the coin flip,
he took his head,
and he just his head is like, oh God, Mahomes is getting the ball. We've lost.
Don't be stunned in the next 5-6 years if the overtime rule changes again, and it's just, hey, both teams get a possession no matter what. Even if it's a touchdown.
It could be the Mahomes rule. Anyhow. Hey, listen, Richie, man, thanks for stepping in. I really appreciate it. Miss you, and hope you're doing well, buddy. And for everybody involved in the Stinkin Truth podcast, that's Richie Carnie filling in for Mike Evans. I am Mark Schlereth. We'll talk to you guys later on next week. Thanks.